With your kind permission, Mr. Chair, we would start. Mr. Chair, the simple outline of our presentation is on the screen. We would just look at terminologies because a lot of terminologies have been thrown around, and we'd like to shed some light on some of these. And some concepts: what is voter registration, what is a register, what kinds of options and methods can we use in compiling a register, and the available technology. We would zoom in on the biometric registration, what the objective was when the Commission started it, what the features are, the methodology that was used, how the data center is managed, and issues that have to do with duplicate search and all that. And then some of the key issues: minors on register, foreigners on register, multiple registrations. And then looking ahead, would discuss some of the allegations made particularly by the New Patriotic Party and the proposals we're looking at. Mr. Chair, a voter registration system basically establishes the eligibility of individuals to cast a ballot in an election or a referendum. And for an electoral management body such as the Electoral Commission of Ghana, it serves two main functions. It verifies voter eligibility, and it controls the legitimacy of the balloting process. I think a lot of the discussions we've had so far have dealt with the legitimacy of the process and all that. But the register also helps the EMB ensure efficiency on election day. So if you do not know the number of voters you have on your roll, you cannot anticipate the waiting periods at polling stations. You cannot prepare adequately in terms of how many ballots should you print and all that. It also helps us support voter education because you know the public you're dealing with and how to reach them. And the political parties also use the voters register to help their campaign, and candidates need to know who they should be speaking to. Our view is that a good register must have certain features. It must be complete. It must have only the details of the voters as required by law. It must be current. It must be regularly updated so that all qualified persons who have not been previously captured have the opportunity to be captured, because you really do not want to disenfranchise any members of the electorate. It must be accurate. It must be well maintained and have limited or zero errors in the data. It must be inclusive. All tribes, persons with disabilities, prisoners, whether you're a house owner or not, as our history shows, you should be on the register. It must be more inclusive than where we started from. But it must also be exclusive. It must exclude all unqualified groups. I think we've heard a lot on underage voters, non-nationals, and we have conveniently left out persons of unsound mind, which may actually be the largest category so far. A good register must also be dependable. It must be responsive to local conditions. So when there's a census, we must take that into account, and we must update the register accordingly. I think where we have issues are with the last two. It must be transparent. It must be trusted by stakeholders. And when you have some key stakeholders cast doubt on the credibility of the register, then we have an issue that, as an electoral commission, we must address. It must also be secure from unauthorized access and usage. We will deal with that subsequently. Now, there are three ways of conducting voter registrations throughout the world. It can be periodic, it can be continuous, it can be based on a civil registry. In Ghana, or it can be one of the above or a combination. In Ghana, we have currently we're doing the periodic registration, where we are now make announcements, we open the register, and then people come and vote, and we do the limited exhibition. The Supreme Court has mandated that we do continuous voter registration. We are working out the modalities with the political parties as we speak to ensure that we have systems in place and we can do that. But in many countries, you also have a voter register that is drawn from civil registry. So for instance, in South Africa, in Kenya, you present your national identity card, no questions asked, and then you're put on the register. I think this is one of the strong proposals coming up in terms of looking at the long term in Ghana, and we would address this soon. In terms of the actual process of creating the register, there are three broad methodologies. You have the low tech, we have the medium tech, and we have the high tech. This is basically used on the level of technology which is applied in the process of compiling the register. We have been lucky in Ghana, I'll just skip this. We've been lucky in Ghana that we have actually had all the different forms of technology applied. So if you go back into our history, between 1987 and 92, we had the low-tech one. No ID cards were issued. You got a slip. And we used this for the district-level elections of 1988 and 1994 and the general elections of 1992. Now, there were a lot of challenges with the low-tech register. There were allegations that it contained names of deceased persons who had died since 1987 because we hadn't really... And of course, there were allegations that some of these dead people managed to vote. Some people got registration slips even though they were not on the register. There were non-Ghanaians allegedly on the register. There were multiple registrations, allegations of impersonations. People said, I didn't go and vote, but later on I found out a vote had been cast in my name. It was claimed that statistically impossible number of voters were registered on the register, and minors were on the register as well, allegedly. This again is from reports from the political parties and observer groups and the EC's own reports. So we moved to the medium tech one between 1995 and 2010. There were forms you had to get shade, and then we used this for the 96 and 2000 general elections and the DLE of 98 and 2002. And we issued ID cards. I think first there were no photos, then we moved to black and white photos and all that. Again, what was its effect? There were challenges, complaints. The register contained names of deceased people, people who didn't had slips even though they were not on the register, non-Ghanaians, minors, statistically impossible, impersonations. Very familiar stories by now to everyone. Then we decided, let's go high-tech and see if we can eliminate these problems. And so for the general elections of 2012, we used the biometric voter register. And this was also used for the district-level elections of 2015 in September. Again, the high-tech came with complaints and allegations. Register contains names of the deceased, there are non-Ghanaians on the register, possible multiple registrations, statistically impossible number of voters, and minors on the register. So the question is, did we go or did we come? Other than impersonations, we really haven't moved. And then, of course, this time we didn't have complaints of multiple voting. But how does this system work? In the history, in 2010, the Commission analyzed the challenges and the problems from the 2008 voter register and all the complaints parties had made in the elections up to that point. And the conclusion was that the most significant category was multiple registrations. And so the biometric technology was chosen to tackle the multiple registration challenge. In March 2011, the procurement process started. The EC had assistance from the UN and EU consultants in preparing the specifications for the system they were going to procure. The objectives of the system were we needed speed and accuracy in the compilation of the register. We needed to eliminate multiple registrations. We needed to lay the foundation for a system of continuous registration and updating of the register. In terms of the actual exercise, it was required under the law that anyone applying for registration needed to produce either a passport, a driver's license, an existing voter ID card, a national identity card, or a national health insurance card. Otherwise, if you didn't have any of this, you required the sworn evidence of two people who were already on the register. There was a registration kit. It came with a computer, a webcam, so your picture could be taken at the registration center, a fingerprint scanner, the micro AFI software. That's the software that analyzes the biometric fingerprints. And then an inkjet scanner, so we could print the forms and the cards at the center. So at the center, the data was captured directly, and then daily, or depending on technology infrastructure, it was periodically updated. Data was transmitted to the district office of the commission, and then directly to a central database of the EC via the commission's network. Now, the main thing is that the biometric system that we currently have, it segregates multiple entries based on your biometric details. And so it won't use your face, but if the same set of fingerprints appear, the system would capture that and put it on a segregated list. The system also creates an exception list based on the time and date of registration. So if, for instance, the date fixed, publicized or fixed for registration is the 1st to the 6th of March, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. If you are registered at 6 p.m. within those dates, you'll go into the exception list. If you are registered on the 8th of March, you would go into the exception list. And so this system was used to identify multiple registrations, because you will walk into a registration center, you can register. You can go to another registration center on the same day and register. However, when we upload everything to the central database, then it would isolate the multiple registrations. So this was basically supposed to reduce fraud of the public and by the public. This basically shows how the process works. But I'd like to save some time by not talking about this, because there's going to be a physical demonstration of the process itself at the end of this presentation. But in terms of the production of the register, at the close of day, every day, the names and other particulars of persons registered are printed and copies given to our dear friends, the political party agents who are the centers. The data of registered voters is also sent to the EC district office in an encrypted format. At the district office, it is uploaded, encrypted, onto a district server, and then the server transmits the encrypted data via the EC network to the center. So there's end-to-end encryption. Now, when it gets to the data center, the data from the districts is received and processed, and then the processed data is submitted to the AFI system, which is the biometric technology software. And it matches each data that is received against all for duplicates. And that's how the deduplication process starts. So that system automatically will flag all suspected duplicates. When it flags it, then adjudication officers will review these potential duplicates and make recommendations. And then the adjudication supervisors who check the results of the work of the recommendations made by the officers. Then these results are finalized by the adjudication committee, and the decision is implemented in the system accordingly before a final provisional register is printed. Now, what do the political parties do in this process? They are accredited observers at the registration centers. And as accredited observers, they have the right to challenge the eligibility of applicants. So for every single person who appears on our register, whether minor, whether Chinese, everyone has the chance to challenge the eligibility of every single applicant. They ensure that the registration officers comply with the procedures and the regulations. At the end of the day, they are provided copies at each center during the registration period. Then when it comes to adjudication of registration challenges through the District Registration Review Committee, they are there. They also participate in the adjudication of suspected cases of multiple registrations after deduplication. And they have the power to object against inclusion of names in the register during the exhibition of the provisional register. In terms of the integrity of the system, all the registrations in the database must be generated by a biometric voter registration kit. And for each kit to operate, the one in charge of the center must have his own personal biometric details set up in the system, and it's only his fingerprint that can open the kit for the process of registration to start. This is a security mechanism to prevent kit duplication. So there is no registration that is generated directly into the database. It must have a BVR kit origin. And as I said earlier, all the data is encrypted from end to end. And there are multiple checkpoints which we've explained through the review process, through the challenge process, to ensure that the data has integrity. And then, as you'll learn later, there are other advanced algorithms that we use to maintain data integrity. So how does the deduplication system work? It pops, this is the way it pops up. So it will display any duplicates, one next to the other, with the biographic information, because you can have similar names, you can have similar date of birth, but we also need to check whether your fingerprints match, whether your facial image matches. And then these are the 3 levels of decisions we talked about. The recommendation of the adjudication officer, then the supervisor, then the committee before the implementation. So it's a pretty rigorous and time-consuming process. After all this, do we still have multiple registrations? Possibly. Because the accuracy level, as per the contracted specifications, is 99.98%. And so, if you're dealing with 14 million, you can still have a few that slip by. And they can slip by for several reasons. Error of the adjudication officer, error of the committee, system failure is possible. Then there are some voters who also make it easy for this to happen. The system works with not less than 6 fingers. Point being that you can't have 2 people using, one person uses a left hand, another uses a right hand to try and confuse the system and get registered. So you must have at least 6 fingers. And if you do not have 6 fingers, then there's a human element that kicks in. The registration officers have some discretion to allow you in, just that the system treats you differently, and we'll deal with that soon. And then there are some people who just have low-quality fingerprints due to the kind of work they do, due to some kind of trauma. And so it's difficult for the system to pick good enough biodata. So all this and the human errors during adjudication process does mean that some multiple registrations can slip through the system. So for those with less than the 6 fingers we talked about earlier, and particularly for those with less than 2 fingers, they come onto the register as facial only. So you'll find FO there, meaning we're not using their fingers, we're using their face. And maybe the MPP will help us with their face recognition technology. So we verify them by picture only. But in order to minimize the chance for false rejections, from 2015, those with very low quality biometric data are also included in this category. So when all this has happened, in 2012, the provisional voter register was displayed in 23,000 plus registration centers across the country. And this was to offer voters and persons qualified to be registered the opportunity to verify their own particulars on the register, object to ineligible names in the register. And the EC actually introduced an SMS system for voters to check their register, their data on the register. Over 900,000 voters used the facility. But it also gives the political parties who are in the communities the opportunity to help us ensure that the register is clean and the register is credible. So for the purposes of the exhibition in 2012, 3 different lists were displayed at the 23,000 registration centers. The provisional voters list containing the names of certified voters, and the exceptions list I alluded to earlier, which contain the names of persons who were registered at unofficial times or who had been challenged during the registration process, and then the multiple registration lists. The debate has been, it's important for the claims, and the debate has been over the 2012 register that was compiled by the Electoral Commission. This register has been updated subsequently, last year, there was a limited registration and exhibition in August and October. So far, 158,000 plus multiple names have been deleted, working with the political parties. And on the exception list, we've had 63,484 names. So it's important for all of us to remember that the register is not static. It's constantly being updated. We're constantly working on it with the political parties. So what we should be looking at today is not even the 2012 register, but the 2014 register. There's a difference between both registers. Now, with regard to the claims and the challenges, there are claims and allegations that we have minors on the register, that we have foreigners on the register, that we have multiple registrations, and that the number of registered voters exceeds the eligible voter population. As we said earlier, the objective of the biometric voter register was never to confirm the age of registrants. The technology cannot determine your age when you place your fingerprints there. We always knew that we would require the collaboration of the community, the political parties, and the citizens of Ghana to prevent minors from registering. From experience of the EC, minors are lured to register by political parties, dishonest parents who have been influenced by political parties, or by parents who really do not know, they're ignorant of the law and do not know that their children who are below 18 should not be on the register, or sometimes do not even know the actual ages of their children. A good example, when we opened the register in 2014 for the limited registration, we found 8,000 voters with the same name and at the same polling station. They had registered in 2012 and said they were 18. We came again in 2014. They came back and they said they were 18. So clearly they had not grown. There had been no maturity in the 2 years since the first biometric register. And so they were treated as duplicates and they were deleted from the system. We've had all sorts of solutions and proposals from the parties, from civil society, from the citizenry at large on how can we resolve the problem of minors on the register. Some of them are to compare the biometric, to compare our database with other databases such as the NIA, the NHIA, and school records. Point being that when you're going to school or you're going for healthcare, there's no incentive to lie about your age. And that biometric matching can be done between the potential minors and their ages are stated in other registers. Some of the issues we thought were worthy of consideration are the legal framework has to be created to support cross-database matching. Sometimes if you deal with people's health records, their privacy, their confidentiality issues that we need to manage carefully. The matching will also take time and resources. A careful choice also has to be made as to the best database for this matching. You have to look at the comprehensiveness of the database before you decide to even embark on the exercise. If the National Health Insurance is capturing 4 fingers and you are capturing minimum 6 fingers, then you have to look at how that is going to translate technologically. You also have to look at the technology they are using and the technology that yours operates on to make sure that the matching can work. And then, of course, the data age. If the data was captured 7 years ago, 4 years ago, it could have an impact how credible the outcome of the process is. When it comes to the issue of foreigners on the register, we need to find out how does this happen? This is basically when non-Ghanaians falsely state that they are Ghanaians when applying to be registered. The question is, why would you want to go stand in for a president in a country where you have reasons? Again, the politicians can help us here. But the Electoral Commission relies on the cooperation of the community and party agents to prevent foreigners from registering. In a country where we do not have a strong identification database, it's very difficult to look at someone's nose and say you're Ghanaian or you're not Ghanaian. So we depend on the fact that the person is registering within a community. And who would know you better than the people in your own community? So we count on them to help us challenge this registration and object during the exhibition. But it's also important that as a commission, we should be wary of using an emotive definition of non-Ghanaian rather than a legal definition of non-Ghanaian, because we're a constitutional body, and if nothing else, we should be respecting the Constitution. And the Constitution clearly defines many ways in which you can acquire Ghanaian citizenship. Birth in or outside Ghana, if you have a parent or grandparent who is a citizen. A child who is found roaming the streets may look very Arab, but roaming the streets, we can't identify his parents, is less than 7 years old, the law presumes that he's Ghanaian until that presumption is rebutted. If you do not rebut it by the time he's 20, he may be entitled to be on the register. A Ghanaian can go adopt a Japanese baby. Baby may have all the features of a Japanese national, but through adoption, that child will be Ghanaian. You can acquire Ghanaian nationality by marriage and by registration. And there is no law we have seen that says that if you acquire it from any other means other than by birth or descent, then you are not entitled to be on the register. And so if we want that to be the law, then we need to take the right steps. But we cannot use an emotive definition to say this is not a Ghanaian and this person should not be on the register. With regard to the issue of foreigners, again, it's been proposed that we use mechanisms for removing unqualified voters, which should be the challenge and the objection process. It's also been proposed that we cooperate with and share our biometric data and compare the biometric information on their database to filter out individuals who registered in more than one country. But if we go back to the law that deals with our eligibility to register, it just says you must be a citizen of Ghana. It says nothing about you appearing in 20 other registers. So if you do qualify, because some countries, all countries have the eligibility criteria. In some countries, is residence for a certain period qualifies you to be on the register. So how does, if you appear on the register of Cote d'Ivoire, how does that empower the EC to remove you from the register of Ghana? Again, we cannot be emotive about this. If that is the general feeling of Ghanaians that that should be the law, then we need to take the proper steps to a legal regime that supports that. There are also sovereignty implications of carrying our entire biometric database of our voting population 18 and over and handing over to another country for purposes of comparing. And we need to think through this very carefully. There are also sovereignty issues here. If the other countries do not want to cooperate, what do we do? Is this going to be treated as an ECOWAS issue, as an African Union issue, as a UN issue, because there are Ghanaians in all over the world? And then there's also the discrimination issue. The question has been asked of us. Why is the EC focusing on Ghanaians who appear in the registers of other ECOWAS countries? Why not Spain? Why not Denmark? Why not Norway? Does the EC have the resources and the time to do this exercise in every country? Otherwise, we could be accused of discriminatory treatment. It will also require having all the original biometric information in a centralized location for us to do this processing. Would this be done in Togo? Would it be done in Cote d'Ivoire? Would it be done in Ghana? How are we going to manage the transparency and credibility issues from that process? And then in comparing these databases too, we feel that we must be careful and we must be consistent in the technology we use. We can't use face recognition to analyze one register and biometric to analyze another register when they're all biometric registers. And also, if the countries you're also dealing with do not have a biometric register, how are you going to compare and eliminate all these names? There's also the matter that we need an agreed legal framework and the support of all the participating countries before we can do it holistically. These are challenges that we are looking at, and we will be very happy for your proposals. When it comes to multiple registration, as we said earlier, the system brings this up, it segregates it. But because of the issue of people with less than 6 fingers, the adjudication process, some may slip through the deduplication system. So it used to be that in 2012 we had a deduplication system that only matched the biometric data. In 2015 we've moved to one that also matches biographic data. So not only would you use your fingerprints to dig up your date of birth and all that and see whether it's a match before we can actually say that this is a multiple and eliminate you from the system. But there are still challenges with people who have insufficient or low quality biometric data, because then we have to depend more on human assistance to manage that. So a lot of the concerns which we are raising on multiple registrations also ignore the changes and the upgrades that have been done to the system between 2012 when the BVR was first created and where we are now in 2015. We've had several system upgrades. The AFIS software we use, we've upgraded it, and it's giving us more accurate results, it's more precise, and it's faster. And it's because of this better adjudication process that with this, working with the political parties, we have removed 158,000 deletions since 2012. Another challenge that has been mentioned is the fact that our registered voter population is comparatively higher than other African countries. I think there's been a lot of the submissions dealt with this. We decided to look at South Africa and Kenya. So Ghana has estimated national population currently of 27.7 million. Our estimated voter population is 15.3 million. On the register, we have 14.8 million. So this is 55% of the estimated voter population and 53% of the estimated number of registered voters. When you look at South Africa, there's a 62% of their voter population that should be on the register, but they actually have 48%. And when you look at Kenya, it's 49% and 32%. But we went beyond this. We've actually engaged these countries. And so, for instance, we asked Kenya, why do you have 14.3 million people on your register when you have an estimated national population of 45 million? And their answer was that at the time they were creating their register, they had only a 1-month period. Their target was actually 18 million, but they only succeeded in getting 14.3 million people on the register. Their actual eligible voter population is 22 million, which is where, if you read their new strategic plan, is their target to close. South Africa was asked the same question, and they said, yes, we have 52 million people, estimated voter population of 32 million. We have only 25.1 million people on the register, and that's because voting is not compulsory, and a lot of people do not feel the incentive to have a voter ID card. So why is Ghana's score so high? And we think it's important that when we're talking statistics, we must situate it within the context and the peculiarities of the countries we're comparing ourselves to. Like I just mentioned, some countries had registration challenges, same as Nigeria. There were a short period to do registrations, they couldn't capture everyone. In Ghana, the voter ID is the de facto national ID. And so there's a great incentive for people to register beyond the interest in political parties. People need a means of identifying themselves, to undertake commercial transactions, to open bank accounts, to acquire phone lines. And because you do not have a national ID system like you have in Kenya and South Africa, for instance, there is not an incentive to be on the register. Voting is not compulsory. But here people need it. And in fact, one of the challenges we're facing as a commission is that currently on a daily basis, we receive requests from security agencies, from the IOCO, from the banks to confirm the identities of people who have been involved in one kind of fraudulent activity or the other and who use the voter ID card as their means of identification. It's a lot of work for us, but because we know that we have not quite reached where we should be with the national ID system, we have no option but to support the security agencies in this. So this is the de facto national ID system. And we do think that as a nation, not only should we consider having a stronger national ID system, but like in most of the countries we're comparing the statistics to, that national ID system must be compulsory. In Kenya, you require a national ID card to get married, to open a bank, to set up a business. We must move there. That's the only way you can reduce the inclination for non-nationals and for minors to try and get voter ID cards as a means of identification. In all the other countries, there are also automatic linkages to births and deaths registries. So they have robust systems of managing national IDs, managing demographic changes, and so this automatically updates the register. And so if we have this in place, it will reduce the opportunities for minors and foreigners to be on the register. So we cannot simply look at the statistics and come to conclusions from that. I think we need to be a bit more investigative and understand the context that this system is operating. There have been requests for new registers, and we've considered it very seriously. And in our view as a commission, these are the issues we need to take into account in taking the decision whether the new register should be done as a solution to the challenges we've just addressed. The timeline is a major factor. We'll need legislation to support it. Drafting and passing that legislation, excuse me, we must also take into account the parliamentary calendar in coming to that, in making that determination. We will need to pilot that registration process, procurement systems, training of the staff who do the registration, public education, the actual registration period, data processing, data deduplication, card production and distribution before we have the register. We've also thought carefully about the social stability cost of a new register. When you have your two strongest parties or two largest parties taking very entrenched opposing views, we're even worried that opening up registration centers will be opening up 30,000 conflict zones, because based on the the shape of your eyebrows and the shape of your nose, there are going to be rigorous objections and challenges. I mean, this is the environment we live in, and we have to take that into account. Of course, we have to look at cost. We don't have unlimited budgets. And we also have to look at how much has been invested into the current system and how much we are going to be investing in this system in future. And then the big question is, what are we going to do differently to ensure that we do not get the same results or worse with a new register? And I think this issue was debated at length yesterday among the parties and the civil society organizations. And then key issue, we still do not have a robust national identity system independent of the EC. And clearly, the problems we have with the existing register are because we cannot say definitively who is a Ghanaian or who is a minor. So if we start this new register and we start from a fresh sheet, when people come to the registration center, it gives you three options basically for establishing your nationality and your age. You can have a passport, you can produce a driver's license, or you can produce a national identity card. If you do not have either of these three documents, how are you going to establish your identity? We cannot say that provide your existing voter ID card, because that is inherently importing the flaws in the existing register into the new register. So if we say this register is incurably flawed and we're going to start a new one, why would we say produce your existing card as a means of coming onto the new register? The other issue is we also cannot say have two people on the register come and attest to you, because we will not have a register. We are starting fresh. So this is a major challenge, and we would welcome the input of the political parties. So we've gone over this, the timelines and all that. We've also looked at the audit solutions. It's been proposed that we can do a physical exhibition like we've always done, or we can put it all on a website, so when people don't want to go for the exhibition, they can sit at home and check and confirm. We can also, international standards, audit through computer tests, where they analyze an electronic copy of the register to determine the degree of error, the demographic trends, and see whether there's a fit. We could also do an audit through field tests, where we do statistical tests to check the comprehensiveness and accuracy of the register. Yesterday, I think Dr. Akweto Baidek proposed a surgical removal. I liked that. Surgical removal of verified errors and the ineligibles that have been identified. It's also been suggested that we could use the National Identification Authority database. A few limitations may come up that they only have 17 million, we're at 7 million, we're at 14 million. The age of the data they have is also a problem because this data was taken a while back. And then I think the NIA uses minimum 4 fingerprints while we use minimum 6 fingerprints. So the issue of the credibility of the output, we need to look at it carefully. But this was suggested because then the pressure and the mandate and the duty is not on the EC to determine the age and nationality of people who show up for registration. We would simply accept the national identity card. As a short-term solution before 2016 is also something we have to consider because this debate is about having a credible election before 2016. Post-2016, of course, it opens up the options a lot more. In looking at audit solutions, we should also take cognizance of the law, and this is just one example of how the law works. There's a law and a process that the EC must comply with. The law entrusts the power of expunging names on the register to the revising officer in a district, who is a district magistrate. The EC only implements the directives of the revising officer. And so, if, for instance, there are names of deceased persons on the register, for us to remove it, we would require the evidence of death. And in most cases, applicants have little or no interest after they've collected the msawa, the funeral, to come and prove that somebody has died and so take the person off the register. So it's a major issue we have to look at, the processes and the law that in terms of how do we expunge names from the register, even if we make a firm determination that they are ineligible. But let's put it in perspective. We thought it was important to have a little perspective here. That in spite of all these challenges, at least the one thing that was addressed, if you go back to our history, is that in 2012 and in the DLE, we did not hear the allegations of multiple voting or impersonations. And this time, because dead people don't have fingers, they couldn't put their fingers and they couldn't vote. Now, we would need to look at the specific allegations made by the New Patriotic Party, because I think yesterday the party said they had written to us 2-3 months now, and the EC had not responded. We have responded. Maybe not in the way that they like, but we thought it's important to go over the allegations. And so on the 29th of July, 2015, just after I had been appointed, I got my first love letter from the New Patriotic Party. It was a request for a new register, and the main grounds in that letter were that, based on the case of Abu Ramadan versus the Electoral Commission and Attorney General, that ruling had disallowed the use of the NHIA cards as proof of qualification to register, and so making it constitutional, void, and of no effect for people who were on the register based on NHIA cards to remain there. So it was important we do a new register. They said the EC has refused to undertake proper auditing and comprehensive deduplication of the 2012 biometric register with the required transparency which stakeholders demanded. They said there was a disparity in the total number of registered voters provided by the EC at different times during the 2012 election cycle. An analysis of the 2010 population census and the 2012 biometric registration reveals several districts where number of registered voters are in excess of the total population census figure for that district. It was also alleged that the register has a voter population that is 56.2% of the total population of Ghana, exceedingly high and unrealistic in their view compared to other African countries. And then they also referred to calls by civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, and others raising doubts on credibility of the register used for the 2012 polls. Okay. In August, we got 18th, I think, of August, we got another request from the New Patriotic Party. The grounds this time were that there were 76,000 Togolese on the register. We at the EC were having a problem identifying conclusively who the Ghanaians are, so much less the Togolese. They said there were edited pictures on the register, and then they said there were about 900 names on an entire polling station. I think that's the Shikakope polling station in the Ketu South district, which had been scanned into the system as evidenced by staple marks in the pictures. They also told us at that time that research was ongoing Togo was just 10% complete. They were going to start the following week with their analysis of the Côte d'Ivoire and the Burkina Faso register. We did reply to them at the time and said the district level elections were very close and we needed to finish that. And then we had the IPAC meeting we talked about yesterday, and we started the process for engagement of other parties. Then in September, we got another letter saying there were about 2,096 multiple registrations which they had detected in the system. Yesterday, there were 2 additional allegations that the register should be thrown away because they didn't have residential addresses as required by law, and there were minors with 0 age. And so, as a commission, we take these allegations very seriously. We thought that we needed to respond to them one after the other. It's just that every time we're getting ready to respond, they come up with another one. But we would respond. With regard to the age of 0, when we checked, it's about 120 voters with the age of 0, and it's a system bug when the system is calculating the age from your date of birth. You see, we take your date of birth, and when it's calculating that, if there's a bug, then it puts it at 0. It doesn't mean, of course, you're age 0, because I'm thinking that all the parties had agents, and so, of course, if you had a baby crawling into the registration center, surely somebody would have noticed before they gave the baby the ID card. Some of the multiple registrations that were put up on the screen yesterday in the presentation by the New Patriotic Party. If you look at just the names, you may assume that there are multiple registrations. But as we explained, we use a biometric data matching, and now we even use a biographic data matching. So we'll also look at your date of birth, we'll look at the registration time and all that to make a conclusive determination whether it's the same person. So once the fingerprints are different, the system would not treat you as a multiple registration even if you have the same name and your ages are similar. There was a case where they said they had the same ID card, and this one, the same name of the parties. But you can see that clearly they are different people. So clearly, operator error. Someone comes to register, and then the same handwritten forms, they just repeat the same name. But the people are clearly different, as you can tell from the pictures and the bio details. And we did say that human error was a part of it, not significant, but the system would pick it up. Then, of course, we talked about adjudication error. This was one of the ones put up by the NPP yesterday. So clearly, similar name, similar date of birth, same polling station. The system should have put this up, but this was flagged by the duplicate was flagged by the system, but it was wrongly adjudicated. But someone like this, just a little perspective. If you were even going to vote at the same polling station on election day, there's also the biometric verification device beyond the register, which would not allow you to vote twice, and plus the extra assurance of the indelible ink. So in terms of the impact of even this adjudication error, is quite minimal when you put it in perspective of the election, the entire electoral process. Looking ahead, the view of the EC is this. There is no perfect registration system in the world. And we do want to ensure that we have a credible register, which would be the foundation for credible elections in 2016. As an election management body, it is critical. But we must also make sure that whatever solutions we adopt must work within the time frame, but must also address the concerns which have been raised by the parties. I left out one thing. In terms of other allegations by the New Patriotic Party regarding the Togolese and the pictures of an entire polling station that were scanned, we have requested from the party the actual register of the K2 South District Police Station that was used in the analysis, because we need to make sure we're comparing apples to apples and not using a 2015 register to compare allegations made probably in a 2012 register. We are waiting receipt of that. As soon as we get that, I'm sure in a day or two we can give them our findings. We are also waiting for the register from Togo, which we do not have, because the one that was provided to us by the party had just the faces, didn't have names, and didn't have other bio details. As soon as we get that, we can also conclude our findings and revert to the party. So back to looking ahead. There's no perfect system. And we must all work to ensure that we have a credible register within the time frame we have, is 12 months to an election. But there is no avoiding the fact that you cannot have a credible register if all the critical stakeholders are not involved as part of the solution for any of the options that we pick. We can change the register, we can change the electoral process, but until there is reform of our political parties and our electorates in terms of how they engage in the system, we will still have a register that is not credible, regardless of how much money we put into the system. And so the EC by itself cannot ensure a credible register. And one of the questions we've been asking ourselves is, Ghana probably has the most inclusive process for creating a register. How can such an inclusive process bring results that parties say are so flawed and require change every 4 years? Surely, we may have to think, is the problem with the technology, with the EC, or with the people themselves? Are we the problem? And we just keep shifting from one technology to another. If the people and the stakeholders do not want a credible process, we cannot have a credible register just by putting money into it. We must all get involved and want the same thing for us to arrive at the same destination. It's also important that we enforce sanctions against offenders. Otherwise, it's going to be repetitive. And so we find minors, we find multiple registration. The legal system must also support us to make sure that offenders are sanctioned. If we sanction a few minors and their parents, then we can be sure that at least we've taken steps to deter other minors and their parents the next time we open the register. And of course, in all this, public education is key. We call on all stakeholders to work with us, but as an election management body, we are totally committed to having a credible register, whether new, whether clean, whether through surgery. And we think that if we do that together, we can all have a credible electoral process come 2016. Thank you.